When I scratched that ticket and saw all the matching numbers, I thought my heart was going to stop. Oh, 1.4 billion. It didn't even feel real. My name is Thomas Grant, a 52-year-old electrician from Ohio who's lived paycheck to paycheck his entire life. I'd never even dreamed of having that kind of money. For a few moments, I just sat there in my truck, staring at the ticket like it was some kind of cruel joke. But it was real. I'd won the biggest lottery jackpot in the state's history. But instead of running out to tell everyone, something inside me hesitated. I thought about how money changes people, how friends can turn into strangers, and family can turn into wolves. So, I decided to stay silent. I claimed the prize anonymously through a trust my lawyer helped me set up. Suddenly, I was worth more money than I could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. And not a single soul in my family knew. That night, as I sat in my modest home, I thought about all the times I'd helped my family. My brother Mark, who borrowed money and never paid it back. My daughter Emily, who only called when she needed something. And my ex-wife Lydia, who once told me I'd never amount to anything. A bitter thought crossed my mind. If they couldn't love me when I was broke, what would they do if they knew I was rich? So I came up with a plan. I'd test them. I wanted to see who truly cared about me, not my money. I gave myself one rule: I wouldn't reveal a single word about the lottery until I knew who I could trust. The next morning, I called my daughter Emily. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound as normal as possible. "I'm in a bit of trouble. My truck broke down, and I can't afford to fix it right now. Can you help me out?" There was silence on the other end before she sighed. "Dad, you know I'm tight on money. Maybe ask Uncle Mark." I smiled bitterly. The test had begun. A few days after Emily's cold response, I decided to call my brother Mark. He had borrowed money from me dozens of times over the years and never paid a cent back. But I figured, maybe this time, he'd show some decency. "Hey, Mark," I started, keeping my voice low and uncertain. "Listen, I'm kind of struggling. Work's been slow, and I can't cover rent this month. Think you could loan me a little? Just a few hundred." He let out a short laugh. "Tom, you serious? You've been working for 30 years and still can't manage your money. Man, you gotta grow up. I can't just hand you cash whenever you mess up." My jaw tightened. I thanked him quietly and hung up. It was all I needed to hear. The man who had begged me to sign his car loan, who once cried on my porch asking for help, had suddenly become a financial saint when I needed him. Next, I reached out to Lydia, my ex-wife. We hadn't spoken much since our divorce, but she always acted like she had moved on gracefully. I knew she hadn't. "Lydia," I said, trying to sound broken, "things have been rough. I might lose the house. I wondered if you could." She interrupted with a scoff. "Tom, I told you years ago to get your act together. I'm not your safety net. You should have thought of that before wasting your life away." And just like that, she hung up. I sat in silence for a long time after that. It wasn't about the money. It was about what their words revealed: indifference, superiority, and selfishness. They didn't even ask if I was okay. That night, I sat in my small kitchen with my winning ticket, framed in a cheap picture frame on the counter. I poured myself a drink and thought, if they can turn their backs on me when I'm broke, they don't deserve to be around when I'm rich. But not everyone had failed the test. My neighbor, Mrs. Parker, a 78-year-old widow who baked cookies for the whole block, had seen me struggling with my old truck earlier that week. She walked over that same afternoon and handed me $20 from her pension. "I know it's not much," she said with a soft smile, "but you've helped me so many times, Tom. Let me help you now." I remember staring at that $20 bill, speechless. That night, I made a decision, the kind that changes everything. If my own blood couldn't be trusted, then my fortune would go to those who still remembered what kindness meant. The next morning, I woke up with a clear mind for the first time in weeks. I had tested my family, and they failed spectacularly. But that failure gave me clarity. I knew who they really were. So, I started planning. Not for revenge exactly, but for balance. The world had shown me who cared and who didn't. Now, I wanted to return the favor in kind. The first person on my list was Mrs. Parker, the sweet widow next door. The woman who had offered me $20 she could barely afford to give. I called my lawyer that morning and told him to draw up a document. An anonymous donation. 3 days later, Mrs. Parker received a letter in the mail. Inside was a note typed neatly on cream paper. For every act of kindness, the universe sends blessings back. Consider this one of them. And attached was a cashier's check for $150,000. The next day, I saw her from my window, crying in her garden, clutching that envelope. It filled something in me that money never could. But kindness was only half the story. There were others who needed to learn a lesson. So, I arranged a family dinner. I called Emily first. "Hey, honey," I said, pretending to sound defeated. "Can you all come over this Friday? I just want to talk things through. Maybe we can make peace before Christmas." There was a pause, then she agreed, though I could hear the irritation in her tone. Friday evening came. The house was glowing with warm lights and polished silverware. A scene out of a Hallmark card. My brother Mark, his wife, Emily, and even Lydia all arrived, each with that polite smile people wear when they're calculating what they might get out of something. When dinner began, they talked about their lives. New jobs, vacations, shopping plans. No one asked how I was doing. No one noticed I was quiet. Until I said, "There's something I need to share with you all." All heads turned toward me. "I recently won something big." I began, but I didn't tell anyone because I wanted to see who truly cared for me, not my bank account. Their expressions changed instantly. Confusion, curiosity, then disbelief. Mark chuckled nervously. "What are you talking about, Tom? You won what, like a raffle?" I leaned back, smiling faintly. "The lottery." Silence. The kind of silence that fills a room with greed. Lydia's eyes widened. Emily's mouth fell open slightly. Even Mark looked like he'd seen a ghost. "You mean millions?" Lydia asked slowly. I nodded. "A little over 45 million. The room erupted. Questions, shock, fake laughter. Suddenly, the tone had changed. I wasn't the irresponsible failure anymore. I was a golden ticket. That's when Emily leaned forward, forcing a smile. "Dad, I'm so sorry for what I said before. I didn't mean it. I was just stressed." I looked at her calmly. "No worries. I remember everything you said." Then I raised my glass. To truth. It always comes out in the end. They smiled. But none of them understood what was about to come next. Because that dinner wasn't a celebration. It was the beginning of my final test. The air in the dining room thickened after my toast. I could see the faint flicker of unease behind their smiles. That desperate greed hiding behind their polite laughter. They were waiting for the moment I'd announce how much I'd share. I didn't rush. I carved a piece of roast, took a sip of wine, and let the silence stretch. "So," Emily said finally, her voice trembling slightly, "Dade, what are you going to do with all of it?" I smiled, watching her eyes dart toward the polished silverware, as though the table itself might reveal my intentions. "Well," I began, "I've been thinking a lot about family, loyalty, and gratitude." I paused, my tone deliberately calm. "And how money changes people." Mark chuckled softly. "It doesn't have to change anyone, Tom. We're family. You know that. Are we?" I asked gently, setting my glass down. Because the last time I asked for help, I was told to handle my own mess. The color drained from Emily's face. She fiddled with her napkin, refusing to meet my eyes. "Dad, that was different," she stammered. "You didn't tell us how serious things were." "Oh, I did," I replied quietly. "You just didn't care to listen." Lydia crossed her arms, visibly uncomfortable. "Thomas, come on. You can't blame everyone for one misunderstanding. You could have reached out again." "I did." I interrupted, my voice steady. "Twice." The room fell dead silent. The only sound was the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall. My late wife's favorite clock. I stood slowly and walked to the fireplace. From the mantel, I picked up a small envelope. One I'd prepared earlier. "This," I said, turning to them, was my experiment. A little test to see how my family values people, not money. I handed the envelope to Emily. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, she found a photocopy of a check. A 50,000 zalozen check written to her name, dated a week after I'd asked her for help. Her eyes shot up in confusion. That, I said, was what I planned to give you for your anniversary. I wanted to surprise you. But after you dismissed me like a stranger, I tore it up. She went pale. Lydia gasped softly. And Mark, I continued, turning toward my brother. I was going to invest in your company's expansion. 300 grand, to be exact. But after you told people I was a burden, I reconsidered. Mark's face turned red. You were serious about that. Tom, you can't hold a grudge over words said in frustration. Oh, I can, I replied coldly. Because those words revealed who you are. I took a deep breath and looked around the table. You all failed the simplest test of decency. And now you want to rewrite history because there's a fortune involved. No one spoke. The sound of the crackling fire filled the silence. Finally, I smiled faintly. Don't worry. I'm not cutting you off entirely. But let's just say, I've found new beneficiaries who've shown me more compassion than my own blood ever did. Emily's eyes widened. What does that mean? I poured myself another glass of wine. It means the woman who lent me $20 to buy groceries will be living in a house by the lake next month. The young man who mows my lawn for free, because he likes helping old folks, will have his college tuition paid. And as for you, I looked at each of them, my gaze steady. You'll receive a handwritten note, reminding you that money isn't the only kind of wealth. Mark slammed his fist lightly on the table. You can't be serious, Tom? I've never been more serious, I said quietly. Now, if you'll excuse me, dinner's over. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving their stunned faces behind. My heart was heavy, but it wasn't regret I felt. It was liberation. For the first time in years, I wasn't the man who needed approval, pity, or help. I was a man who had learned that sometimes, silence and distance are the greatest revenge. But what they didn't know yet was that I had one more surprise left. A surprise that would make them question everything they thought they knew about me. The week after that dinner felt strangely quiet, like the calm after a storm that had rearranged everything in its path. My phone barely buzzed anymore. No good morning texts, no casual calls, no fake concern, just silence. At first, it stung. The absence of their voices echoed louder than I expected. But soon, I realized silence can be peaceful too. Especially when it replaces hypocrisy. Still, I had unfinished business. My family thought I'd simply moved on. But what they didn't know was that I'd been working with my lawyer, David Langford, on something far greater than cutting ties. When David arrived that morning, carrying a folder thick with documents, he smiled knowingly. Ready to finalize the trust, Mr. Pierce? I nodded. Yes, and I want every word to reflect my intentions. No loopholes, no second chances. Inside that folder lay the blueprint of my final lesson. Not revenge, but a reckoning. I poured us both coffee as he read aloud. Upon my passing, the estate shall be distributed as follows: charitable foundations aiding the elderly, scholarships for working class students, and housing funds for low-income families. David paused. And your family? I smiled faintly. Oh, they'll receive something. Just not what they expect. He flipped to the next page and raised an eyebrow as he read my special clause. To my daughter, Emily, and my brother, Mark. Each will receive a handwritten letter detailing their true inheritance, which shall remain a reflection of their actions, not their entitlement. David chuckled softly. That's poetic? It's justice? I said. Not cruelty. That evening, I began writing the letters. The words didn't come from anger anymore. They came from clarity. To Emily, I wrote, my dearest daughter, I once dreamed of leaving you everything I owned, but the day you left me to struggle alone showed me that compassion can't be bought. I hope this loss teaches you the value of presence, not money. Use this time to rebuild your heart before chasing wealth again. To Mark, I wrote, a brother, you once said I was foolish for expecting kindness without offering profit. So now I leave you a business lesson: never underestimate the cost of arrogance. I've invested elsewhere. In souls, not stocks. Each envelope contained a $1 bill, crisp and new. Symbolic. Just enough to remind them that greed had cost them everything else. Once the letters were sealed, I drove to the local shelter. The same one that helped me when I had nowhere to go during those dark days. I handed the director a signed deed for a small house on the outskirts of town. For families who need a fresh start, I told her. Name it the Pierce Haven. She was speechless. Tears welled in her eyes as she hugged me. You have no idea what this means to us. Oh, I do, I whispered. Because once, I was on the other side of that door. As I walked back to my car, I noticed the sky painted with strokes of orange and pink. For the first time in a long time, I felt my wife's presence, that quiet warmth she used to bring into every room. I smiled up at the clouds. I did it, Marie. I finally let them go. Later that night, Emily called. Her voice was shaky, hesitant. Dade, I got your letter. I could hear the tears in her tone. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I closed my eyes, a lump forming in my throat. You're not the first to fail, Emily. But what matters is whether you learn from it. I want to, she whispered. Can we talk sometime? Of course, I said softly. But not about money, about life. As I hung up, I realized something profound. Perhaps losing everything for a while had been necessary. It stripped away the masks and revealed the truth of those around me. Now, I wasn't just a man who'd won billions. I was a man who'd earned peace. But my story wasn't quite over. Because the world still thought I was an ordinary retiree, no one, not even Emily, knew what I was planning to do with the rest of my fortune. And when they finally found out, it would make headlines. It had been exactly 6 months since I last saw my family. 6 quiet, peaceful months. The air around my estate felt lighter, as if the ghosts of greed and betrayal had finally drifted away. Most mornings, I'd walk by the lake that bordered my property, coffee in hand, reflecting on how far I'd come from the man who once begged his daughter for help. That Thomas Pierce had been desperate for love. This Thomas Pierce, he had found peace in solitude and purpose in generosity. But the time for peace was nearly over. The day had come for the truth to break free. My lawyer, David, had just left my house after handing me the final proof that my plan was complete. The Pierce Foundation for Humanity had officially launched. Every dollar from my lottery winnings had been transferred into the foundation, with clear instructions not a cent could ever be redirected to my family. The world, however, was about to know everything. That morning, a prominent financial newspaper released the headline that would ignite a national frenzy. Lottery billionaire revealed. Thomas Pierce donates entire fortune to charity. After family betrayal. By noon, my phone was exploding. News channels wanted interviews, talk shows wanted exclusives, and my once indifferent family suddenly rediscovered their ability to call. When I finally answered Emily's call, her voice trembled between disbelief and regret. Dad, you gave it all away. Yes, I said calmly. Every penny. To those who truly need it. She was quiet for a long moment before whispering, You didn't even keep any for yourself. I smiled faintly. I kept enough to live. Not enough to tempt. Then she broke down. Dad, I can't believe what I did to you. All those times you asked for help. I was cruel. I was selfish. And you still taught me what real wealth means. Her tears weren't manipulative this time. I could hear something real in her tone. Humility. And that, more than any inheritance, was worth everything. I don't need your apology, I said softly. I just need you to live differently. Remember this, Emily, money reveals character, it doesn't create it. I will, she promised through sobs. When I hung up, I realized something unexpected. Forgiveness felt better than vengeance. That night, the local news aired a special segment on me. Reporters stood outside the Pierce Haven, interviewing families who'd been given shelter, children now attending school, and elderly folks finally getting medical help. A mother holding her baby said through tears, "We prayed for a miracle, and Mr. Pierce became ours." I watched silently from my living room. My chest tightened with emotion. This was what wealth was meant for. Not pride, not power. Legacy. The next day, I received a handwritten letter. No return address, but I knew the handwriting immediately. "Dad, I started volunteering at a shelter today. I think you'd be proud. I finally understand what Mom and you always tried to teach me. I love you." Emily, I read it twice, then set it gently beside my wife's old photo. "Looks like she's finally coming home, Marie," I murmured, smiling. Weeks later, I stood before a crowd at the official inauguration of the Pierce Foundation for Humanity. Cameras flashed, applause echoed, and I stepped up to the podium. Not as a billionaire, but as a man reborn. I looked across the crowd, my voice steady as I spoke. True wealth is not measured in what we hoard, but in what we give. I once tested my family to see if they'd help me when I had nothing. I failed that test. But I passed a greater one. Because I learned that generosity doesn't need witnesses. It just needs will. The audience erupted in applause, but my eyes found one familiar face near the back. Emily, standing quietly, tears in her eyes, clapping harder than anyone else. And in that moment, I realized, everything had come full circle. I hadn't just lost a family and found fortune. I had lost greed and found grace. As the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, I stood under the setting sun, whispering to myself, maybe winning the lottery wasn't luck. Maybe it was a test. And this time, I finally passed. And with that, Thomas Pierce walked away. No longer the man who hid his millions, but the man who had earned his peace.